Another massive patch has landed in Marvel Snap, and we have a massive nerf to one of the most influential cards and meta warping cards we've had in a while in Blob. There's a whole bunch else going on, but we got mostly buffs, with the exception of this one here. Blob does get nerfed from his 6-4 to his 6-0, which makes him much more susceptible to something like a Shadow King. However, what's very notable about Blob is the text change. Now, merge cards from your deck until it gains 15 or more power. This is important because the way it actually works is once Blob's power, it absorbs a card and it reaches 15 or more, it stops absorbing cards or merging cards. What's interesting about this is that, well, let's say you have an Infinite next, and then you merge with the Infinite, you'll have a 620 Blob, and it'll just stop there. However, let's say you hit a Red Skull first, it'll go to 614, and then you hit an Infinite next, it'll actually go to 634. What it basically means is that it absorbs the next card, including its power, as long as the net power of Blob before absorbing that next card is less than 15. So it can go above 15, but only one card above 15. This is notable because for Thanos, you have a lot of stones, which are like 1 to 3 power. And the result of that, it's very likely you hit a stone and it stops at like 15, 16, or 17. So pretty significant nerf to Blob. However, it's still very variable based on how much his power is going to be. So you can't like predictably say, okay, they're going to play a Blob, it's going to be 15 power. No, you really have no idea what it's going to end up, but it is a net nerf overall for sure, which I think should honestly open up the meta quite a bit because this card has been meta warping. And that being said, 20% meta share is a lot. So it's good to see Blob getting a bit of a nerf. Now we're getting on to the buffs, and this one's actually a pretty good one. We have a buff to Destroyer. Now it's kind of funny because at the time when Destroyer got buffed from 16 power to 15, everyone's like, that's pretty inconsequential. Like, who actually cares about a 1 power nerf to a card like Destroyer? Well, apparently it made a big difference. The card had a 44% win rate, and obviously no meta play because like this is post-infinite stats, and who's playing Destroyer post-infinite? There was a couple like fancy pants little small decks we experimented with, but it was never good. An additional power isn't going to hurt. It probably doesn't bring Destroyer back onto the meta full swing, but at least gives it its power back. And of course there might be some additional synergistic cards in the future that'll help out Destroyer. And then we go to Viper. Viper's pretty interesting here because with Viper it got nerfed pretty hard. Went from a 2 cost to a 3 cost, and although they said like they kind of were hoping to make a sideways move with Viper, they weren't intending it to be a nerf, so they wanted to restrict the Havoc and Viper play, which was notable. That's kind of what I was referring to prior. They also wanted to restrict like the way that you were playing Black Widow with Selene and all these other junk type archetype cards, and the result was that they're like, okay, Viper is problematic but not to an overextent, so they changed it to 3 cost, and ultimately it kind of just died. So now at a 3-5 it has a very strong stat line, at least a baseline stat line, and so hopefully it brings Viper back into the mold. And perhaps they're hinting at here they got some new cards coming out that Viper might want to play with. Then we go to Selene. Now Selene was very interesting because this is a change that obviously she's coming out a little weak at 46%. It also doesn't help that Annihilus and the entire junk archetype got nerfed. And it's actually funny. I feel a little bit of, I feel like I've been vindicated because here in the note it actually says subsequent changes to Viper and Black Widow weakened these combinations plenty. That's exactly what I said. Essentially on the Snapchat with Cozy and I, we talked about how Selene was a very good card. And then prior to the release, both Viper and Black Widow, notably Black Widow, got nerfed, and the result was that Selene's viability dropped substantially, because when it's a niche card, its ability to synergize with its archetype is incredibly important, and Selene got like crazy punished by those nerfs, and it dropped the viability of the card significantly just before the release of the Spotlight Cache, which was crazy. Now going from its a -1 to a 2 is notable as well, because now Annihilus won't push Selene over. Kind of cool, I guess, but it was another junk piece that you could use, whereas with this, like before now, okay, Annihilus can't send rocks over, you could at least send Selene, but now you can't send Selene either, and it actually stays on your board at 2 power. Now, we've all lost games by less than 2 power, so it's not inconsequential. However, it's a very different approach to the card. It actually feels like a totally different card now, because you're not junking it over in addition with, whatever else you might be playing. Interesting change to Selene. I don't know if this is enough. I just don't know if it's enough. We'll have to see, we'll have to test it. But overall, Selene getting one might say a buff, but it actually loses some playability because that -1 allowed it to be part of the Annihilus kickover package. And we have Elektra. They said that they were experimenting with a bunch of different approaches to a new version of Elektra and ultimately just landed at, let's just give it 1 additional power. which is fine, I guess. This card is going to be an MVP in like pool 1 and 2 because of the ability to snipe a sunspot or the ability to just destroy a zoo lane with like an Ant-Man or something. So it's going to be very viable in those brackets. In the upper brackets, thanks to Kyera, Armor, and others, it doesn't see that much play, especially since it's a very reactive card that you can't play. You can't play on turn 1, like what you can do, like snipe their turn 1 play. No, you gotta wait, right? So it's a later turn play at 1 cost, which can be tricky to fit into many decks, especially since Marvel Snap only has 12 card decks. So ultimately, and 1 power buff is not insignificant for Elektra. However, it's still above grade, I think, as turns of a card you're gonna want to add to the mix with all the protection available for 1 cost cards now, especially with Kyera in the game. We go to Dazzler. Now, they mentioned that they were expecting Dazzler and Brew to be a major component of Silver Surfer. That never actually played out. There was some experimentation with Dazzler, but also ultimately was terrible as a 3-2 in Surfer. Never really made it. I really like this change. The reason why I like this change is because very recently when Kyera came out, I was trying to do Zoo again. Zoo had a problem of not being able to go vertical enough against something like a Blob. The big meat stick of Blob was just too big, and it was just too vertical, and Zoo couldn't compete with that. Moreover, cards like Dazzler and Shauna, which should be decent in Zoo-based shells, felt weird because they were both 3-costed, and like, how do you fit them into a game plan where you on 4 might want to play Kazar, on 5 Blue Marvel, then on 6 you gotta do something. And if with Dazzler at 3 cost, it was Dazzler Shauna usually to try to finish the game, you just didn't have enough power. Dazzler at 2 gives you, I'm just gonna leave it. Dazzler at 2 basically lets you like add an additional 1 drop on turn 6 to kind of clear out your hand and help you zoo further. So this power drop, not power drop, the energy drop is very significant for Dazzler, especially when you consider she's used in zoo type archetypes, right? So I think this is a very significant buff. It might not look like it at first glance, but it really does help elevate zoo even more. You have Kyera elevating it, and now you have the new Dazzler. I think this is a big difference. So I'm going to try some Zoo moving forward. Okay, this is going to be a little controversial. Okay, this is going to be very controversial. Hercules, which was an absolute trash tier card. I said it on the Snapchat. Cozy's like, nah, it's not that bad. I'm like, it's garbage. And it goes from a 4.6 to a 4.7. Like literally a week after it was released. This is crazy, right? And it's crazy for a number of reasons. One, obviously, if you're someone who like didn't get Hercules and it gets buffed a week after, literally the moment it leaves the spotlight caches, it gets buffed. That can be super frustrating, right? Especially if it was a card that all of a sudden becomes meta relevant and is like a top tier card in the deck. You're like, I could have gotten a spotlight cache, I didn't, and now it's buffed immediately after I can't get it. I can get why that's frustrating, right? It's like crazy. The other side to that is like, okay, let's say you did roll spotlight caches and you did get Hercules and you're like, well, what a waste of a key. Well, now it got buffed. So there's a commitment of making the cards better if they're undertuned, and of course nerfing cards like Blob if they're overtuned. But this is kind of interesting. I'd be interested in hearing your comments down below because like part of me says, you know what, I'm glad they're being responsive, and like everyone that got the card incidentally is like, okay, it's less bad now. But everyone that like skipped on it is probably like, what the hell, man? Like, why couldn't you tell us, like, why couldn't you announce this change before we had a chance, like, to get it again? You know what I mean? Like, tell us that this change is happening while we can still get them in the spotlight caches. Very interesting Marvel Snap economy conversations to be had, I'm sure, in the future. But regardless, Hercules sucks. Maybe he sucks less now. 4.7 is actually a pretty decent stat line. It's above grade. Generally, anyway, 4.6 is usually where you want to be. But anyways, so yeah, this is not bad. This is not bad. I love this change. This is insane. I actually, in my experimentation with Hercules, found that Dagger was probably one of the most underrated move cards in Snap. In fact, I know that a long time ago we had a conversation with Molt, and Molt was talking about how Dagger was one of the most underappreciated cards in Marvel Snap, specifically for move too. And now Dagger goes from a 2-2 to a 2-0, but most notably it gets +3 power for every enemy card in its movement position. That's crazy. That ramps up very, very, very fast. To the point, like, could Dagger outperform something like I've been trying to figure out, like, an early Dagger with some quick moves with, like, Iron Fist and, I don't know, a Ghost Spider into Hercules or whatever. Like, could this outperform a Vulture? Probably, right? Like, it's kind of crazy what it can do. Although a lot of the meta right now isn't revolving around putting a lot of different cards down. I mean, Thanos does. Maybe I take that back. But I do think this is a very significant buff. The change to Hercules and this change to Dagger, I think really helps Move a lot. So I'm interested in seeing how Move can, like, use these buffs to its advantage. Because right now, the only real Move deck you're seeing in its Move in some way is the Phoenix Force style decks. And even those percentages are pretty damn low. So Dagger getting buffed, and Dagger's not in those decks either, but Dagger getting buffed I think is going to provide Move with another big tool to actually do some work. This reminds me of what like the Cyclops is to High Evo, that overstated piece that kind of elevates the entire archetype, but only in that archetype. You're not playing Dagger in like a weird regular deck. You're not playing Dagger in Surfer or something. You're not putting just Dagger as a 2-cost tech card. It's very specific to Move. Just like Cyclops is very specific to High Evo, and so kind of overstatting them I think can help those archetypes pretty significantly. You know what helps me? Hitting the like button. What a transition that was. And also subscribe if you're not subscribed already. I know there's a lot of people that aren't subscribed. I would really appreciate it just so you can stay up to date with my content, and we'll see you on my next Marvel Snap video.